couldn't get her away from her.
Yeah. Okay. All righty. Good. Who else wants to put your face on? Okay. I see where it says Seymour, but this does not look like
It's
Seymour.
not, it's Joyce, his
Hi,
wife. But we
Joyce.
don't know how to change the name.
I can relate to that. Okay, Joyce, glad to see you on board here. Who else is on with me?
I really enjoyed the book.
You want me to teach you how to rename it? If you look at your tell me, I'll try to rename you. What's the name?
Joyce,
Joyce
Joyce. Yes.
1 second, I'll do it.
Wow, Joyce, you're going to get an identity. Great.
That's
Here you
about
are.
time.
About time. Right. It's just a few years.
Oh,
right?
thank you. Thank you so much.
Cute. Okay, let's see if I see. Oh my goodness, there's Joyce Bellman. All right.
Who is the Zoom
Thank you.
user? Who is the
Thank
Zoom
you.
user?
There's Zoom user.
Okay.
Both.
Who's Zoom
It's
user?
Seymour's machine. Oh, there's my friend Beverly.
Okay. I see a Shelly on board. Who's Shelly?
Who is Shelly? Who is Lila?
Hi, guys. Glad to see everybody's names on board. Would love to see some faces. I see Beverly. Happiness is seeing Beverly there. Who else do I see? Okay, great.
Even
Sandra,
for
I see your name.
the first few
Judy.
minutes, so we will see who are we yeah, please. It would be nice to see faces.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I'm really glad to see everybody. We'll wait just a couple more minutes, right? And then we'll start.
Lynda Farber is joining.
Great. Okay.
I guess it was a very good book, Lynda.
It was a good book.
I haven't read any of her other books, but I certainly will now.
People have really enjoyed her other books, but they're very different than this one, but but she's a nice writer. Mm-hmm. So while we're waiting, let's have a little bit of a conversation here, okay? So first of all, does everybody know Leah, who has done an amazing job? She started out just doing Israeli programming, right, Leah?
Yes.
And then took on an amazing job of helping out where Debbie left off, because Debbie, of course, has moved to a different job.
Oh my gosh, we have more. Thank you.
Hi, Joanne.
We have a nice attendance today.
I know, I'm so glad to see that. So the question we have is, what is going to happen for the remainder of the year? So there is a new person on board. Leah, what is her name?
Ali Summers.
Ali Summers is going to be coming on.
Hi. Here is Ali.
Oh, hi, Ali. Okay, good, Ali. So I'm Lynda Levin, and this is our terrific Zoom group right here, our book discussion group. Great to see you. Great. So the question we're going to see is whether we're going to continue in February as a Zoom or whether we're going to go live to the JCC. So the question we want to ask you guys is, how many of you, well, Leah, would this be an appropriate question to say, how many of you would like it to go live in the JCC? So you could call out, because Lynda would like to, okay. How many of you would be
either way?
Yeah.
This is my first time attending. So,
okay, so Barbara, you're in either way. Leah, you could kind of keep track of this. Lynda's in. Who else is in for if it was live?
Zoom.
Joanne wants Zoom. Who else?
I do, Zoom.
Alyssa, Zoom. Anyone else want to weigh in here?
I'd like Zoom.
Lila, Zoom.
Yes.
Who else? Anybody else have any other thoughts on this? Anybody else want to go live?
Would the live be at this time, 2 p.m.?
It would be at 2 p.m. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
It's always a little more personal
Right.
in person, but I respect that some people need to do it from home, you know.
Okay. All right. Any other feedback, guys? Okay, because we're trying to figure out what we're going to do, because, you know, we are not having a January book club, and we're going to say that you should keep, yes. Did you have your hand up, Lynda?
Well, one of the things that this has made it easy to do both because it's in the library
Yes.
and here on Zoom. So that's a nice ability to do both if you can't. I've just started to attend things that, I'm involved with the J, so I go, I'm involved with a lot of projects, but I like the availability to do both. I loved when I was coming to the J, I've been very involved in cultural arts, but the availability to do both is very nice,
Yeah.
for some
Yeah.
people, and I understand. But the object of the J is, of course, to get people back to the J. So I understand both points of view.
Right. Arlene just weighed in, by the way. Thank you she went to Zoom. Okay. So, yesterday we did meet at the library, and there are a number of our people that have started coming to the library for the live on Tuesdays. They've been coming to the library. So the same week, the third week of the month, and they come to the library. So we could continue. That'll be Allie. That'll be much more of a discussion for you to have with the committee, whether we're going to continue with Zoom, whether we'll go live, what we're going to do for the future. Okay. So what I'm going to suggest to everybody is please be on the lookout for Allie's emails to you from Cultural Arts, and she's going to keep you posted as to what is going to go on for the remainder of the year. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay. So if we continue, then of course we've got great books coming up, and we'll let you know what they are. Anything else we should add to this conversation, Allie or anyone? Okay. So then in that case, just stay tuned, as we say, right? Just check your emails and you'll see what's coming up next. Okay. So I'm so glad. How many of you really enjoyed this book? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
And I would love to see some more faces because we've got a nice group here. So I'd love to see you. If you are up to it, go ahead and put yourself on, put your face on so we can see you. But otherwise, if you would rather, you can certainly speak, microphone on. And then the other thing is you can certainly write in the chat. Okay. But part of our success has been the fact that we all like to talk and we all like to chime in on the book itself. Okay. So let me give you a little background, first of all, about the author. Lisa Scottoline is a #1 best-selling and Edgar award-winning author of 33 novels. Edgar Awards are given for the best mystery writers, and that's usually what she writes, psychological and mystery writers. Okay, I'm so glad I'm seeing a couple more people here. BC, hi. I see initials BC. What is your name?
BC, I go by BC.
Oh, BC. So glad. Welcome on board. We're so glad to see you. Great. Okay, good. And I
Thank
see
you.
Myra. Is that you on there?
Yes, I'm having trouble getting onto my computer.
Okay, but we see you now, which is great. We've got you on. Yeah, that's great. Okay. So her books are book club favorites, and she and her daughter, interestingly enough, a girl by the name of Francesca Saratella, they are both authors. And Lisa, by the way, our author, has served as the president of the Mystery Writers of America. She writes lots of reviews for the New York Times, also for the Washington Post, Philadelphia Inquirer, and she writes reviews of fiction books, nonfiction books. And she also writes a weekly column with her daughter, and it's called Chick Wit. It's a witty take on life from a woman's perspective. They've collected a few of these, and they've put them in a best-selling series of humorous memoirs. Okay. Lisa graduated magna cum laude in 3 years from the University of Pennsylvania. She has a BA in English. She graduated also from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She taught justice and fiction. She has over 30 million copies of her books in print. She's published in over 35 countries. She currently lives in the Philadelphia area. What makes this book interesting to me is the fact that this is her first foray into historical fiction. Because as we mentioned, her books are usually psychological or mystery kinds of thrillers. She has said that the inspiration came from this book, from a course that she took at the University of Pennsylvania that was taught by Philip Roth. He taught a course called The Literature of the Holocaust. And what was really special about this course was that the text that they used as a source was a book by Primo Levi called Survival in Auschwitz, which was, of course, his memoir of his time when he was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II. And that class had a tremendous, tremendous impact on Scottoline. And she says that Eternal is actually the culmination of her interest and all of her research. She says that she was interested in writing a book about Rome because Rome actually is their ghetto there is one of the oldest continuously existing Jewish communities in all of Western civilization. How many of you have ever been to Rome and walked through the ghetto? Yes?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Stanley saying yes. Lynda,
Yes.
you're nodding yes. A few of you are nodding yes. So the author here tells us that the story of what happened in the ghetto is not well known. And I think it's true. Most of us know a lot of what happened during Poland. We know what happened in Germany, but we weren't quite as familiar with what happened in Italy during the Holocaust. And she wanted to shed light on this. It was something that she did not really know about, and she wanted other people to learn about it and felt it was the perfect setting for her story. I will tell you that she has a very big presence online. And if you are at all interested in knowing anything more about her, she has written a whole series and she has a lot of videos about a lot of things. But one of the things that would be of interest perhaps to you is that she wrote a series called Behind the Book. And it is about Talking Eternal with Lisa. That's the name of it, Talking Eternal with Lisa. So if you are interested, you can look up the author on YouTube and you just write in Eternal or write in Talking Eternal with Lisa, and you will come up with a series of videos about her and this book. Okay, so just to give you a quick summary to refresh your memory, because I know some of you read it a while ago. The year was 1937, and of course we're going to meet the three main characters, Elisabetta, Marco, and Sandro. They grew up as the best of friends. Elisabetta is a beautiful young girl, and she wants to be a novelist. Marco is the brash and athletic son of a family of professional cyclists. Sandro is the son, he's Jewish. He is a Jewish mathematics prodigy. He is the son of a lawyer and a doctor. And they've got this great friendship, the three of them. Starts when they're little kids. And then, of course, as they get older, it blossoms into love. And it turns out both boys are vying after Elisabetta's heart. So the story would be a sweet story on its own. But of course, what makes it so rich is it is taking place during the autumn of 1937, when everything starts to change. Mussolini is asserting his power. He is aligning Italy's fascists with Hitler's Nazis. He's altering the various laws that govern Rome. And in time, everything changes for these characters. We're going to see in this story how anti-Semitism takes legal root. We're going to see how World War II erupts. And we're going to see how the Nazis invade Rome and the atrocities that follow. So obviously it is a heartbreaking story. I want to ask you first off, were you engaged in this story? And what is it that engaged you? What did you like about the story? Or did you think it was so-so? What were your thoughts on the book as a whole? Okay, Lynda, there's so few of us, we could just talk. Go ahead, Lynda, go.
Okay. I think my opinion is not going to be well received. The story was interesting, because I always like to find out, how the war was affected in different cities that we didn't know. However, I felt it was predictable, number one, especially, when the triangle started to continue and you knew what was going to happen. And I didn't find that it was well written. A lot of times the language was, it wasn't superbly written. It wasn't, it was okay. The book was okay. I finished it. I was interested in coming here to find out what everybody else thought. Would I recommend it? you know, I would tell somebody just what I'm saying. It was an interesting story. I learned about the ghetto in Italy. It was, you know, it was okay.
It was okay. All right. How about the rest of you?
If I may, sort of to add to what Lynda said, I had a hard time getting into the book. It did get a little bit better for me. And of course, what always entices me as to how does it really end? And I think she's right, it was quite predictable. However, what really bothered me was the amount of detail. And of course, it's all Italian, which is not my first language, to say the least. But I mean, did I need to know every little street and place that they went in full detail? I thought it was overly done.
Ah,
And
interesting.
Yeah, it made me very frustrated.
Yeah. DC, did you have something you wanted to add? Did you have
No,
something?
I'll go. I have a completely different take. I found it to be a page turner that I couldn't put down. And I have read many stories about the Holocaust, but as you said in the opening, I did not know as much detail about particularly the level of Jews who were fascist in Rome, which I found to be fascinating. The details for me were, I like that. It helps me be in the room and smell and feel and taste. With regard to the ending and the triangle being predictable, I didn't feel that way. I felt so strongly that it was like those flukes that happened during the time of the war, whether it was Russia or Poland or Italy, that unique situations happen to people because they were devastated, they were traumatized, and they needed connection.
Right.
And
So,
people did unusual things during those unusual times. But
right.
quite frankly, I loved the book.
Yeah.
Me too.
So, and you, good. Stanley and Barbara chiming in that they love the book. You know, I have to say that I kind of agree with Lynda in one respect. The writing was not as superb as we have seen in some of the other books, but I was very engaged for the very reason. To me, this was two stories in one. The one story was about the three kids, right? The love triangle. But the story that engaged me more was the history. I found it amazing, the history, and I loved that. Now, it's so interesting with the idea of detail. And it is the idea of, you know, that's why we have chocolate and vanilla ice cream, because other people have loved the detail. And one of the things I was going to ask you, one of the questions is, do you think the writer was successful in making Rome alive to us?
No.
For me, yes. And I like that the streets were named and all. I felt like you could really be there, you know. And you know, there was a slight map, remember, that gave an overview of the city, and you could look and you could see where the ghetto was and a few of the other things. I found myself, you know, flipping back to that map a few times.
Right. Wanting that detail. Yeah. She does a very good job of letting us see where the Tiber River, the fact that there's a church, there's a hospital across the street.
And, you know, I liked all that. It made it very real to me.
Right. So the other thing she does that's interesting, anyone have any other thoughts on about the setting, how she sets the setting for us? You know what I loved? Her use of detail when she talks about the food. Did you notice that? I mean, she talked
the food and growing of the vegetables.
The vegetables, her root garden, her vegetable garden. I loved the use of the detail of pasta. And I thought to myself, you know what? Listen, Rome, there's nothing like pasta in Rome, right? in Italy all around. So the idea that she described, whether it was Maria, whether it was Marco's mother Maria making or Nona making the pasta, but that really made everything kind of come alive and bring Rome alive to me. Obviously, there's a lot of overarching themes here. What would you just say are some of the themes in this story? Well, obviously. What?
How family helps
For,
us
for me, it
survive.
was the historical aspect and fascism.
History, teaching the history, the family. What else?
Them.
The
And
power
the-
of friendship, right?
Yes.
There was something very important to me about it that was a contrast to today, which is in the midst of violence, there was a tremendous sense of decency and integrity that still came through, civility between people in the midst of brutality that I don't see today.
Okay, so what I want to do at the end of this is leave ourselves some time to really talk about today, because I think there are some parallels that we would want to talk about today, okay? And it's interesting. I mean, I think what you're talking about is the relationship between the people, right? Is that what you're talking about, the civility and the caring for each other? We see that. We do see that, of course, in the midst of, with this background.
Within the ghetto and without and outside.
Right, right.
And the confusion of the commitment to fascism and
Right.
how that created its own community.
Right. I loved, by the way, her descriptions of the ghetto, and I thought that history of the ghetto was really interesting. How the ghetto started in 1555, how the walls went up and the doors were locked at night. I thought all of that was very, very meaningful. And then the idea that the walls finally came down and people could go where they wanted to go. And leave. And yet a lot of Jews didn't leave the ghetto, and they stayed there, and they built that beautiful temple that is there to this very day. So this setting is important. And I want to start by talking about the tone in the book. It starts with the very first chapter. And if you remember, now it's May of 1937. We've got these kids at the riverbank. The boys are riding bikes and they're doing homework, and they've just come from their compulsory youth group. Elizabeth is reading the newspaper, but she realizes that her favorite columnists were probably fired because Mussolini had been in power for about 15 years and the fascist party. And she knows that probably her favorite writers, columnists, had been fired because of censorship. The kids know that those who speak against the fascist party probably get arrested. And yet, what is their mood? Hope. What else?
Compliant. I mean, no, they're not compliant. They're just, it's a normal life right there.
You just hit on my word, normal. It's so normal, the normalcy of teenage drama going on. Elizabeth thinking about who's going to be her first kiss. You know, all of this normalcy that's going on in the face of what's going on, the big backdrop,
But
right? They don't know.
That only emphasizes how little the Jewish population in that time, in that era, how, and I say this with kindness, how ignorant they were, not ignorant, not ignorant in a bad way, but in a kind way. They had no clue that they were going to be subjected to
anything
horror.
right. And so not only did they not see anything coming, but they were young kids and they really didn't see anything coming. And even the adults, for the most part, didn't see anything coming. Okay. Also, I want to talk about this friendship between Marco and Sandro. There was one scene in the story, see if you can think of what I'm thinking of, that really showed the closeness of these boys in school. Do you remember that one scene? Yeah? Okay, so the scene I'm thinking of is when the teacher says, okay, guys, come up and read your essays.
Oh.
And Marco, what's Marco's problem, guys?
He's
can't read.
He can't read. He can't read. So he thinks, okay, I'll read my essay. I'll just sort of, that's no problem. I wrote it. But here's the bad news. The teacher says, okay, read each other's essays. So what does Sandro do? Remember? He
He like covers
deciphers
them.
Yeah,
those childlike handwritings and he makes up an essay.
makes up everything.
He makes it up, right? Makes it sound
Yeah.
good. And
That's
and
right.
then Marco, of course, realizes what his good friend did, and so he can't read Sandro's well-written essay, so he goes ahead and makes it up also. But you see how they cover for each other. It's wonderful. Okay, Elisabetta. All of these characters go through a tremendous arc of change in this story, and a lot of it is because of the situation of what happens. Of course, Elisabetta changes a great deal. In the very beginning, we see her. How does the author portray her in the beginning? How do we see Elisabetta? How do we see her? Well, what?
She's eager to succeed in school.
Yes, in fact, she really admires Sandro's mother, the doctor, right? She
Oh, yes.
doesn't want to just be a stay-at-home mother and cook and sew and bake, which is what the fascist women, what they idealized. So, so you see that about her. What else do we see about her? She's a typical teenage girl, right? She even argues with her mother about needing a bra. Remember that part? And it's
Oh, yeah.
funny because, by the way, in one of the videos, the author writes, she says in her video that that was a very personal part she put in there because she herself had that kind of argument with her mother. And so she put that in, really making her kind of come alive. So we see that she is a typical little teenage girl. She's shunned by some of the other girls, by let's say, the mean girls. So we see her very typical. And then all of a sudden she starts to change because she experiences some losses. What happens to Elisabetta? What makes her?
You're talking about her home life, you mean her parents?
Her home life is a shambles. First of
Yeah.
all, what happens?
The father's a drunk, the mother leaves.
Left. The
The
mother
mother,
left.
right, the mother leaves, the mother abandons them, and she says, Mama, wait, don't you love me? And Mama doesn't answer her, and she says, well, don't you love me enough to stay? And of course, Mama just turns her back and walks out. Heartbreaking. And father is now a drunk at home. He's drinking himself to death. And so what do we see with this girl, Elisabetta, this little teenage girl?
She had to grow up
happens to
very
her?
fast. She had to be in charge
Grow
of her
up very
father.
fast. Exactly. All of a sudden, what adjectives would we use for her now? Capable, caring, right? Responsible. She's now taking care of her father. She's the earner in the family, right?
Yeah.
What else about her? Anything else about her that we want to talk about in those early years? The reason I want to talk about these characters in the beginning is because they all show characteristics that later on are going to prove very necessary to the success of the end of the book, right? What happens at the end. So we see all of a sudden this cute little teenage girl, all of a sudden, as you say, as Barbara points out, she really does grow up quite quickly. And we see she's got a lot of capability to her.
Like she could have wallowed in, despair, but she kind of did the opposite.
She
rose
did.
up to the-
She
rose
did.
up to the occasion.
That's right. In the beginning of the story, life happens to her, but as you point out, as these losses happen, all of a sudden she takes control, and we see her all of a sudden becoming independent. She's influenced a great deal by another very strong female character, which is whom?
Nona.
It's the restaurant where she works. Nona offers her a room, right? Just to refresh your memory. And Nona says to her, listen, I don't want to keep hearing about these boys. Which one should you choose? Why, and this is a quote, why must it be about men? Remember, I'm telling you, preserve your independence. What will it take for you to become the woman who God intended you to be? So Nona is the influencer who goes ahead and gives her a notebook and says, hey, you want to be a writer? Write. And she does. Every night she writes about 100 words. She disciplines herself. So she really starts writing, and she writes a little fictional book, which unfortunately she finishes the night that Nona passes away. Remember, that was a very touching scene. Do you remember that in the story?
Yeah.
She reads the book to Nona after Nona is gone. So now the Nazis have taken over, and Elisabetta, who has already exhibited independence, she's now taking care of herself, and she has to. The Nazis come, and what other adjectives can we say about her? How else? What do we see about her once the Nazis come?
Defiant.
defiant.
Right.
And one of the things that she does, which was funny, what does she do? Not funny to the Nazi, but funny. She's serving him. She says, "Oh, I'll serve him,"
Yes,
right?
yes,
And takes hot pasta with oil and dumps it so that it falls into his crotch, right? So
Yes,
it-
it's sick.
okay, so yeah, that was her little act of defiance there. But we see that she's very resilient.
Hey.
Yeah, Sheila, did you have
Yeah.
So what we see is that there's food shortages, and yet she continues to make the best pasta in Rome, and she's making that restaurant work. She's got a strong work ethic, and we see that she's really quite responsible. But the other word I want to say about her is she's very brave. How do we know that? What does she do that exhibits such bravery later on as the story progresses? Well, how about the fact?
She, go on.
Go ahead. No, BC, go.
She continues to see Sandra when it's not permitted.
Right. And she sneaks food to the family, right? And even when she finds out about the gold that needs to be collected,
Yeah.
she goes over there and she delivers money so they can buy gold. She's really doing a
Well,
lot.
Marco does that too.
And by
Marco
the way,
also feeds the family.
100%. Marco does it too, and we see that. And we see that she's very not only brave but fearless. She
Yeah.
actually, do you remember when at the very end of the story, Sandro is now in the ghetto, has been rounded up, and she
Yeah.
goes to the Nazi who goes to her restaurant and she says, "Listen, Baron, you do love eating at my restaurant, right?" He says, "Yep." And she says, "Okay, well, I need you to help me get my boyfriend out." He says, "I can't. There's no way I can do that." She says, "Well, at least keep him in the country," because she hears that they're going to be taking them out of the country. And sure enough, they transfer him to Fossili, which is a transit camp in Italy. So she's quite fearless. She comes up with that. And we know she comes up with the whole idea of the escape plan, how to get Sandro and hopefully his father out of the camp. We know she's also heartbroken at the end because Sandro has turned her away. And why has Sandro turned her away? When she finally decides on Sandro, why does he turn her away?
Because she's not Jewish and it would be forbidden.
It's forbidden. He knows it's forbidden. He can offer her no future. And so it breaks his own heart. But he says to Marco, "Go for it." And he says to her, I don't love you anymore. And he says his feelings have changed. So we know that she's got a lot of these, she's also, by the way, at the end, she's quite heroic. Remember that ending? I thought it was very heroic of her. Number one.
But I find this honestly to be what happened with many people when I said about integrity and things like that, that's really what I was getting at, is that people tried to remain civil and human when they could. And that means feeding somebody or putting somebody you love, putting their welfare first.
That's right. And she so many times risked her own, put herself in danger. When you think about how she went ahead and lured that Nazi, remember at the very end, the way the plan could work at the end is Marco is going to set a fire to distract the guards, but she's got to get the first watchman out of the way. So she lures him and he comes to her and he's actually on top of her when Marco finally comes and rescues her, but she really put herself in a position of possible rape. So she's quite heroic, but it all is for the benefit, as BC is pointing out, of course, for saving Sandro. Marco is a very interesting character. You started to touch on him. He comes from a very wonderful family. What do we know about Beppe, the father? What do we know about Beppe? He's a professional cyclist.
Right.
We know that he's a very strong, athletic guy. We know he's a tough guy.
And he's a
He's
fascist.
a devoted fascist.
A devoted fascist. Yes, he's a real fascist. He's a fascist of the first hour. So we know that about him. We know that the one flaw he had, by the way, what did he end up doing with Elisabetta's mother? Remember that? He had an affair years ago with Elisabetta's mother, which caused a lot of a lot
Anguish.
of angst there, anguish, exactly. But that, of course, is well past. And the only thing that is interesting about that affair is that when Marco, his son, finds out about it, he is crushed. His father has always portrayed himself as this very respectable, upstanding man, and all of a sudden he says, "What? You had this affair? You betrayed my mother?" And of course, it changes his attitude about his father. Okay. Now, what also is interesting with Marco is he's got two other brothers. One is Amedio, who is a priest with the Holy See, which, by the way, allows the author to tell us a lot about the Vatican at this time, right? Did you find
Yes.
that interesting?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
we'll talk about that. And the other thing is the brother Aldo. Now, what do we know about Aldo? Why is he such an interesting character?
He's an
He's-
anti-fascist.
He's an anti-fascist. Early on, he's an
Yeah.
anti-fascist because he saw the handwriting on the wall. He's the one who saw that all of a sudden, hey, this fascism thing is going in the wrong direction. He realizes that. Okay, so unfortunately, what happens to Aldo?
He does.
He
He
dies.
gets killed.
He's killed. He has a very dangerous mission. He's ambushed and he's tortured and beaten to death. Okay. How does his death affect the family? Well, how does Beppe feel when he finds out about his son dying? Most of all, when he finds out he was an anti-fascist.
He can't accept it.
Had to
heart-
accept it.
He's heartbroken.
angry. He's angry at his son. In fact,
Yeah.
Marco is destroyed by his father again, says, wait a second. You care more about your embarrassment about the fact that he was an anti-fascist than you care about the loss of your son. So Marco, that didn't take much, but it was one more thing that really pushed him over the edge towards really being mad at his father, right? So that's a bad relationship, deteriorating relationship between Marco and his father.
There's something critical in that moment, which is that it shows the commitment to whether you call it fascism, Nazism, or a
Yeah.
cult.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
That to me was the most critical piece is that his commitment to this cult was more than his commitment or his
Yes.
compassion for his son.
Uh-huh. So you're calling this fascist piece a cult. Okay. Well, you're right. In many ways, it displays a lot of the same characteristics.
A cult, authoritarianism, you can call it anything. Dear leader.
It's very important to know. So we question, why were all these people fascists? Do you know that 1/3 of the Jews in Italy at that time
Yeah,
were
we're
fascists,
fascists. Yeah.
right? They were fascists.
For
That
economic
Mussolini came
reasons.
to power with a lot of support from the Jewish community. So
Mhm.
why
For
was that?
economic reasons.
Economic reasons. And what else?
They
This-
weren't religious. They weren't religious Jews.
No.
They were assimilated Jews.
Okay, but it had nothing to do with
They
that.
were
so much.
They were Italian.
They were
They used-
Italian.
Yeah, they were Italian first.
And not only were they Italian, but Italian first, but what's interesting about that is that why did even all the Italians, why did they become fascists? And at the end of the story, I think at one point, Massimo or somebody is explaining it to one of the characters, and that is that there was a sense of nationalism, national pride that fascists
Yes,
did. It
yes,
made them
yes.
all Italy. Hey, Italy. Let's go back to our grandeur of the old days, of the ancient
right.
days,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so that's very important. These people thought that they were nationalistic. They wanted a wonderful, strong Italy and economically strong Italy. And the Jews thought it was very good for them as business people to be fascists. They didn't see, and by the way, they kept saying Mussolini will never,
Yeah,
betray
never
us.
turn on us. Yeah.
Never turn on us. So
there was something in that nationalism that was different than other countries' nationalism that is unique to Italy and Rome, which is this historical
pride.
aspect that was romanticized. It wasn't about war
No.
and tyranny and power. It was more that, and it wasn't Aryan elite or superior, it was a romanticized view of culture.
You see, you're really hitting on it because there's one scene when we talk about Marco. Marco got very immersed in fascism. So why? Here's Marco. We're going to talk a little bit about him. But Marco, at one point, is remember, he can't read. He feels really not smart. He has a lack of self-esteem because he didn't do well in school. Remember, he quit school. He's getting a lot of wonderful feedback as now he's working for the fascists for Bonacoso in the, he's really looking good and he's feeling good about himself, but he still is feeling a certain lack of self-esteem because of the reading. But one day, there's a scene in the book, which goes back to your point, BC. He sees an excavation site. He goes down, he descends into the site, and he walks upon the marble floor. And he sees the columns lying over on their side, carved with flowers and letters. And he thinks to himself, oh, the ancients, my ancient ancestors carved these letters. I come from these ancient people. I may not be able to read, but I am a son of Rome. And in this way, I'm very special. What a wonderful birthright we have. And so he has that sense of nationalism based, as you say, not political, but it's more historical, right? That's a very good point.
Except, Italy does have that historical nature way, 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 way back.
Right.
But everything you read about the Jews in Germany, they didn't flee because they kept saying, we're Germans. How
Exactly.
could, we're Germans.
Yeah,
They
it was
wouldn't do
the
that to
same
us.
thing. It was similar.
Exactly. They didn't have the historical nature of Italy, which they were so proud. But it was the national. We're Germans.
It was. You're
we're
right.
not Jews first. And that's why they didn't leave. That's not going to happen to us because we're Germans.
That's
just
right.
like them.
And in this case, we're Italian. We're Italian.
Exactly.
Massimo, Sandro's father, is the perfect example. We're going to talk about him because he really exemplified what you're saying, Lynda.
Exactly.
He's Italian. I'm Italian. What are you talking about? I fought in the war. I've got medals to prove it. I am Italian. Exactly. So there's another characteristic about Marco that's really important to hit on. He's dyslexic, maybe a little self-esteem, feels proud about being Roman, very into fascism. But what is it about him that's also very important and later on becomes a wonderful characteristic for him at the end?
He is bright. He is bright. He's just learning disabled.
That's right. That's exactly right. He can read people. He's very smart. He just has dyslexia. Exactly. But what about him in the way of his personality? Okay. How about the fact, what?
He's forgiving.
He's forgiving for sure, but also he is a risk, guys. Remember that? He loves to, he takes Elisabetta. He's tried to court her, right? He takes her to his boss's office in the Gestapo, right? The German thing. And she says, are we supposed to be here? He says, no problem. My boss isn't here. They go to his office and he goes out on the balcony and he says, hey, come on up here. And what's he doing? He climbs up on the balustrade there. And he says, come on, and she goes, no, it's so scary. He says, no, come on. And she loves the fact he's adventurous. He's exciting. He is a risk taker. He takes her for a ride in the car. She says, oh my God, what a car. He said, yeah, it's my boss's car. Does he know you have it? No. And then she says, wait a second, you don't have a license. But he takes her for a thrill ride. So you see, he is a risk taker, which explains how he's got the guts to do what he does at the very end to save Sandro. So we see that Marco has become a fascist, but nonetheless, he is sneaking all this food to Sandro. He is proud of his position with Bonacorso. He's learned a lot about the party, but he honestly believes the party has nothing to do with German nationalism. He agrees that with everybody else, Mussolini will never turn on the Jews. And Marco really immerses himself and gets into this whole fascist thing because he is under misconceptions that, of course, there is no relationship between Nazism and fascism. Well, of course, we know that changes.
But there's a point there. I'm
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt.
No,
I
no,
think there's
go.
an
That's what we're
important
doing.
point,
Right.
which
Mhm.
is there's a perception that fascism as a political ideology is not only legitimate, but has benefit.
Oh, yeah. Has great benefit, which is why so many Jews supported it also, right? That there were great benefits to it.
There's an embrace of fascism as now we think of it as authoritarian or, the turning point to dictatorship. But at that point, fascism only in Italy, because didn't happen in Spain, but there was a perception that it was a good ideology.
Yeah. And it wasn't until all of a sudden the shock came when Mussolini decided to align himself with Hitler. And of course, everybody was shocked about that. One of the things that's interesting, Sandro, and we talked about this relationship that Marco and Sandro have. Now, what's interesting also is the fact that Elisabetta is trying to decide between the two boys, right? And she's decided on Sandro. Sandro has turned her down, says, no way, I don't feel the same way about you. We know, of course, he's lying because he realizes the divide between Jews and Gentiles is too huge to offer her anything. So now Marco has offered her a ring and she won't take the ring. And why does she not want to take his ring? What are her feelings? Why is she conflicted about Marco?
But she loves Sandro.
She loves Sandro, but she realizes there's no hope with Sandro. What else? Well, let's put it this way. What encourages her to finally take the ring? And this is a very pivotal piece in the story.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Sandro says to him, give her a gift for her birthday. What should he give her?
A ring.
Journal.
A journal.
Oh,
Well,
a journal.
by the way, he had already offered her the ring, and she said,
Yeah.
no, I'm not ready to take it.
Oh, there was a journal.
And now he gives her a journal, he gives her a notebook. And why is that so significant that she says, I will take the ring now? Why is she willing now? Why? What's so
She's-
significant?
She's she's very appreciative of his understanding of her, supposedly, and
Yes.
his thoughtfulness.
Okay.
I mean, she didn't know how it really came about. And she just thought he's the man because he understands her.
He gets me. All of a sudden she realizes, you know what? He is supportive of me. He gets me. He knows what I want, what I need. And he's supportive of me going on and having a career as a journalist. And it's wonderful. That notebook was a fantastic gift. Only one problem with it was
from him. It wasn't from him.
And how does it come out that all of a sudden she says, oh, Marco, thank you for this gift. And of course, he doesn't say to her, actually, I'm not the one who gave you the notebook. He doesn't. He accepts her praise, her thanks,
Yeah.
and he gives her the ring and everything is great until she comes to realize what?
That it wasn't given by him.
It wasn't from Marco. And so what does she do? She breaks off the relationship. Because why? She thinks he lied to her.
Mm-hmm.
And so she breaks off the relationship. Okay. Now, Sandro, we know, is a whole other character. He's this mathematical genius. He's lovesick over her. He puts her first, breaks it off because of the situation that's going on. What's interesting about Sandro, more than anything, I think, is his family. His father, Massimo. Massimo, to me, was really interesting because he was representative of that proud Jew who was a fascist, also very involved in the Jewish community. He was a leader in the community, supported Mussolini, and of course, upset that Sandro even mentioned that he was interested in a non-Jewish girl and says that could never happen. But what we end up seeing with Massimo is that he is aware of anti-Semitism, but never thinking it's going to be anything at all.
Him.
His son Sandro has no idea of anti-Semitism. What's Sandro's first experience with anti-Semitism? Do you remember? He goes to a lecture of the mathematical genius, by the way, who was a real person. They called him
Yes, yes,
Einstein,
yes, yes.
who was taken to Auschwitz and perished there. But this Levy,
But also the sister warns the family early on,
Mhm.
and they all think she's crazy.
Crazy,
so
yeah.
Rose is a great example of, and to me, each of the characters in this story, I think the author did a good job, because each of these characters is a voice of the time, a voice of the community at the time. Rosa was representative of someone who says, oh, like Aldo, wait a
Mhm.
second, guys, this is the writing on the wall. We really got to get out. And she
Mhm.
tries to get the family to emigrate. Massimo is that other guy. Massimo's the father, and he says, no, 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 there's no way. Don't even tell him. There's no way Mussolini is an anti-Semite. So for Sandro, the first time he knows anything is when he hears people say, one guy after this wonderful talk that the mathematician gave, somebody says, I'll be damned if I'm going to clap for a dirty Jew. And Sandro is shocked. He says, what? And what he's really shocked about, do you remember what really appalls him? At the very end, he turns to other people and he says, wait a second, did you hear what he said? And not only didn't the people say, oh my God, why did he say that? And stop and admonish him, but they all pretended like they didn't even
Didn't hear. Yeah.
He didn't hear. Exactly. So that's his first taste of anti-Semitism. Of course, then he's so affected by the race laws. All of a sudden, the number one race law, all the teachers are fired, including the professors. Number two, all the students are kicked out of the school.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh my God, me? Does that mean I can't graduate with my class? I can't take this internship with Professor Savita? What? All of a sudden, it becomes very personal. It's so interesting because there was writing on the wall, which nobody could really see at that point. And it's interesting that Rose's fiance worked in the embassy and from London. And he thought he had the whole picture because he saw what was happening in Germany. He could see what was happening. And Rose is trying to talk to her father and the family about emigration. And Massimo says, absolutely not. We Jews joined the fascist party in the same proportion as Gentiles. National German socialism has nothing to do with us. Our friends, all the Italians, they don't think of us as Jews. They think of us as Italian Jews. We are Italians first. And
Nice.
after all, he says, listen, Mussolini is going home to a Jewish mistress. How could he be against Jews? He's loyal to the Jewish community, to the patriots, to the veterans. Fascism will never become anti-Semitic. Well, we know how that goes. Okay. In 1938, there was the Manifesto of Racial Scientists, signed by 42 scientists who said there exists a pure Italian race and Jews do not belong to the Italian race. So with that, all these race laws happen. And what is Massimo's answer? This is so telling. No teachers are allowed in the schools, no Jewish teachers, no Jewish students. So what does Massimo say?
We'll organize a separate teaching.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. He said,
Separate, we'll have separate but equal.
exactly. He says, obviously, this is a bad situation, but we're going to make the best of it. Separate but equal. We'll have our own situation. We will hire the 170 secondary school teachers, the 100 university professors. We will take care of the 6,000 Jewish students who are kicked out. We'll have our own schools. And so right away, he says, we Jews are adaptable. That's why we survived. And so he's right away trying to think of legal ways to answer. And there's one problem with his thinking. What's the problem with his thinking? Okay.
He was being intellectual and not using either his gut or his heart.
Intellectual, but he's also a lawyer and he's thinking legally. And what's the problem with thinking legally with these issues?
Because the laws aren't there
There's no
anymore.
The laws aren't there anymore. They changed all the laws, and that was the scary thing. There wasn't a leg to stand on. There were no laws anymore. What happens to Massimo, by the way, in this story?
He
He was a
survives.
heartbreaking character, I thought, huh?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When they started in the book, when the decrees came down, you can't do this, you can't do this. I had, even though I intellectually know it, I had a very visceral reaction. Did anybody else react very strongly to it?
Well, we've seen it in so many other countries.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I
So
think I reacted that way
Horrific.
because I was connecting with the characters.
yes, with
Mhm.
connecting with the characters. And also, no matter how many times you see it, you can't help but have somewhat of a visceral reaction to it because it's so unbelievable.
Insane.
This could have
Horrendous.
happened, that this could have happened to these people that were, in fact, Italians. You know, how could this have happened to them? So it's sort of and Massimo believes like you do. He can't even believe that this is happening.
Because he wants to go by the letter of the law.
He wants to go by the letter of the law. He does. He's beaten down by this. It has taken a psychological toll on
Oh,
him. He's
yes,
walking around
yes.
with his legal papers in a notebook.
Right. He
And
was
Sandra-
really having a breakdown.
He is having a breakdown, and all of a sudden, he is so betrayed. He's even kicked out of the fascist party. They don't allow Jews in there anymore, so he has no identity left. And of course, what we start to see now, Massimo is broken down. Sandro's whole family is falling apart at this point, right? He can't go to school, and all of a sudden, Marco turns against Sandro. And why does Marco turn against Sandro? Why?
I don't remember.
To help him accept the fact that he should be the one to go after Elizabetha.
No, but why does Marco
No.
get so angry at Sandro? Don't you remember the main thing? Because
No.
Elisabetta figures out that Sandro gave the notebook and not Marco.
Right.
And so he thinks, and when she breaks up with him, he goes into the ghetto and he sees the two of them. Sandro they kiss, and Sandro sees it. What's his name? Marco sees it, and Marco thinks that they have been betraying him behind his back. And he's in the ghetto, and he does something really ugly. Instead of just saying, Sandro, I'm so mad at you, he yells out, you Jews, all you Jews are filthy Jews, all. And he screams this out. So what is he doing? He's feeding into the anti-Semitism that already exists, right? And who overhears him even are those two bad guys, Stefano and Carmine, right? And they say, well, you're finally getting it. We've been saying this all along. These Jews are nothing more than filthy liars. And so what you see is this, Marco is besides himself. He is now throwing himself even more into the fascist party that's now Nazis. He becomes friends with Rolf, a big-time Nazi. And he even says to his father, what does he tell his father? He tells Beppe, don't give them any more food. Don't give them any more food. They've betrayed me. They are filthy Jews. And what does his father do, Beppe? He admonishes him. He says, what? How can you turn on your best friend like that? How can you? Okay. So we see Marco is so angry. Fortunately, that changes because Marco does come to his senses at some point. And what is the thing that turns him? Do you know what turns him back? What turns him back towards his friendship is he's with Rolf, the big Nazi. And he realizes as he's listening to Rolf that Rolf doesn't really care about, he's German, doesn't care what's happening in Italy. He doesn't care that Sicily is being bombed, ruined. He doesn't care. All he cares about is what's happening with the Germans. And one day he's with Rolf and he sees a work detail. And it turns out, do you remember this scene? It's a group of forced laborers from the ghetto. And who does he lock eyes with? He sees Sandro.
Yeah.
He sees his best friend, this bona fide mathematical genius who is
Yes,
digging
on the labor line. Yes.
on the labor line, and he thinks to himself, oh my God, what has really happened here? And what have I become? and he starts to realize, and I love this expression, he realizes he has become his uniform. He has
Yeah.
become a real fascist, and he is now ashamed of all that he has become and all that he has done. And what's interesting about that is not only is he now going to reunite in his own way with Sandro and try to save Sandro, but he even goes back to his father, who he now has really detested up to this point. But he goes back to his father and he sees his father, he reunites with him, and he looks at his father. I love this quote, with an expression that mirrored his own love, anguish, and regret. So he embraces his father, and at that point, his father tells him, his father, Beppe, has been part of a partisan group, secretly, right, against the Nazis. And he does join his father in this partisan effort. Now, the author wants us to know there's a lot of evil in this story, but there's also a lot of love. And BC really hit upon the first part of love when you talked about the idea of the relationship between the people, the relationship between the friends in the ghetto, the relationship of the friends outside of the ghetto who snuck food into them and who came forward and gave them gold when they, which by the way is all a true story. They gave them gold so they could make the quota of the gold. So you have that kind of love. What other love was there exhibited in this story?
I think the most poignant scene for me of all was when his mother pretended to be a nurse at the hospital to save the daughter.
Yes, when she dresses in the nun's garb. And that is a lot of love in there. Number one, it showed the nuns quickly coming to the rescue of the mother, giving her the nun's outfit.
Yeah.
The other part of love that was huge, and this, by the way, is true. There was an Italian doctor who came up with the idea of Syndrome K, which was
Yes.
infectious disease. He made it up,
Very
and he
interesting.
said there was and by the way, it worked. It was an infectious disease ward. They moved all the Jewish patients in there, and they were able to save those Jewish patients. So there was a lot of love in there that way. I even thought that undertaker who came in, remember that scene? Remember, this was a sad scene when Beppe comes back to his apartment, and there is Marco's mother, and they're hiding their Gemma, who is the mother of Sandro, because she has left the hospital. She comes now to Gemma, to Maria's apartment, Marco's apartment. And who's there? The two bad guys, Stefano and Carmine. Remember that? And it's a bloody scene that goes on there because all of a sudden they slit Gemma's throat. After all, she's a Jew. And then Beppe lunges at them. They shoot Beppe. They get shot also. So in that scene, at the end of that scene, there's 4 dead people. The 2 bad guys, Gemma, Sandro's mother, and Beppe. Remember, Marco's father dies in that scene. They call the Undertaker, and the Undertaker says he will cover for them all. And he will go ahead and he'll get rid of those 2 bad guys, their bodies, throw them into the Tiber. And as far as Beppe, he'll say he died of a heart attack. And as far as Gemma the Jewess, what's he going to do? I like this part.
He was giving her a Jewish burial.
He was going to put, exactly right. He was going to put her in a plain pine box, and he was going to bury her as close to the Jewish cemetery as he could. So there was a lot of love there as well. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about which scenes you found the most descriptive. I think we're running a little bit over. Are you guys okay with that? Yeah? Okay. But I think some of these descriptive scenes were very poignant to me. I thought the scene where you can just picture when Marco and Elisabetta do this ruse, and they're going to now get in there and they're going to allow Sandro and his father to escape. And it works. Marco sets the fire, it distracts all the guards. Marco is able to run in there, and he grabs Sandro and he tries to get Massimo out. And Massimo is limping and he realizes he can't go. and he says, "Go without me." And Sandro says, "I'm not leaving you. I'm not leaving my father." And Massimo says, "You've got to go. Marco, take him. Take him. You must take him." And Marco needs to physically take him away from his father. So you can imagine the poignancy of that scene. What other scenes were so descriptive to you that were moving? I thought, I think I'll refresh your memories. How about the synagogue scene when they come in and they're before they even collect the people out of the ghetto, they go to the synagogue. Remember that?
Yeah.
And they grab the Torahs and they throw them on the floor. And they go and they confiscate. This was really scary. The community list of Jews. Remember that?
Yeah.
That was, by the way, that's how they found a lot of the Jews. They went to homes and they found them. So they had the list of Jews. And then they had also this other group that went to the libraries. And what were in those libraries? Wonderful, beautiful, ancient books, all kinds of books, and centuries old manuscripts. And they took them and they threw them into boxes as if they were pots and pans.
Oh, and that so disturbed the father, Maximo. Remember, he was trying to grab them, and they were making fun of him and throwing the books around.
Barbara, you thought that scene was so horrible. You could just picture
it was
Massimo
like crystal knock,
from window to window, trying to save to pick up every book as it was being flung out of the windows, and the Germans were having the best time having a show, making him run back and forth. What else? I thought that scene of the knock on the door and the rounding up of the people from the ghetto was so painful. Any other scenes that you want to talk about? Okay. So what about the history surprised you? Any history that surprised you in this story? So I was number one surprised. Did you ever hear the story that the Nazis, what they did was they first rounded up all the Italian Carabinieri, the police.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want anyone to get in the way of their roundups. And so they got rid of the Italian police. They locked them up, and then they went into the ghetto. That was number one. I didn't know that. The other thing was when Mussolini was on his way out, I did not know this part, that he went out first, and then they set him up. The Nazis set him up in one part of Italy, and they set up this other guy, Badoglio. Did you know that part? Another prime minister. So the country was divided. And the Jews in the ghetto were hoping if Badoglio had if he had it in him, he could align himself at that time with the Allies. But he didn't. And so what had happened? The Germans moved right in.
Right. They were like waiting. That was their moment.
That's exactly right. Exactly. So, by the way, that's one of the reasons why when fascism came in years later, why fascism was really powerful was because it had been a country that had always been sort of divided. And of course, it was now divided again. I want to just talk a little bit about the Vatican. Were you surprised by anything you read about the Vatican? Any thoughts on that?
No, I wasn't.
Yes, I was very surprised that they were taking in Jews.
I wasn't surprised.
They were taking in Jews and hiding them in the Vatican. That surprised me.
Right. So we didn't know that. We do know that the Vatican, the author actually says, I want to come back. Remember that point which you said about the hiding them. Because that's the upside of what happened. On the downside, and the author tells this, remember this scene? Marco and his brother, the priest, have a fight. The priest, Emadio, says to his brother, Marco, when Marco's being mad and saying, take away food from Sandro's family. Emadio says to Marco, what is wrong with you? How could you take away food from your best friend's family? And then Marco answers him, don't you think it's hypocritical to ask our father to keep feeding the Jews when the Vatican won't lift a finger? Why should my career be harmed for the Simons? So in other words, he's admitting that the Vatican is doing nothing. Marco and Emadio, of course, had this argument. But the other line that's very damning that the author writes, at the very end, Marco and his father are watching the covered trucks driving from the ghetto filled with all the Jews to the military college. Remember that scene? And he's describing the military college. He writes, quote, crisscross bars covered the oblong windows of the college, making a grim presence on the Piazza del Rovere, only a kilometer away from St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Marco wondered what was going on behind the Vatican walls. He hoped Amadeo and the others were trying to help. He prayed that the Pope would intervene on behalf of the Jews. Nobody had before, even after the race laws. The Jews were on their own. Marco kept running, fighting a sense of dread.
Close this? No, are you on Wi-Fi?
So, in this book, the author really does admit and show that the Vatican did not do everything they could have done at that time. On the other hand, going back to your point, Stanley, right?
Yes.
Your point was the surprise at so many being hidden.
Yes,
right?
I was
Mhm, yeah.
surprised because the Pope was really afraid of what did Hitler do to the Vatican.
He
He
was.
destroyed the Catholic religion, destroy it at its roots, the Vatican.
Right.
And since it was Hitler supposed to be Protestant, but he wasn't anything, would come in and want to go after the Catholics. After the Jews, they would want to go after the Catholics, and he wanted to destroy the heart of the Catholicism by
So-
destroying the Vatican. That was his main fear.
Yeah. So
Oh.
so the Vatican, so what Amadeo says in defense is that, the truth is the back channels work. So supposedly back channels did work. Okay. I want to ask you, what do you think is the takeaway message of this book?
When you
Oh,
know
story.
people personally, when you have personal relationships with people, it changes everything. It counteracts political happenings.
Okay.
We're still humans,
Right. Yeah. The takeaway message being that human relationships, love between each other can override a lot of the
I
other
think
stuff.
so.
Yes.
I think so.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that, which is also my takeaway, is there is a very, very dark, destructive side to human nature, which is extremely compelling. That's why I used the word cult before. And sometimes the destructive side is far more compelling than the innate love. And when you see that dark side gathering steam, pay attention.
Well, we always have the choice between, the good and evil.
Yeah.
I think also,
But when do you know,
al-
how do you know when to protect yourself?
Right.
That's,
That's
well, I
it.
think that's
Beverly.
that's kind of what I was sort of related to what I was going to say. I think that one of the things for me was that the reality was not a factor until the very end, that they didn't live in reality. And it's really, I can relate to what's going on today.
No,
And I know you're going to bring it up.
no, Beverly, you've taken me there. Perfect. Thank you. Go ahead.
Anti-Semitism is certainly on the rise. We may not, hopefully none of us have felt anything, but it's definitely in reality. It's going on
Absolutely.
all over the world. And so it brings us right to today. Here we are 70 years later, and we're starting to go through the same thing again. And I can foresee people saying, oh no, it doesn't affect me. It's not going to happen. We're in 2023. It's not going to happen. But it very well could and would happen as the numbers increase in terms of the hatred for Jews is overwhelming, overwhelming. We are blamed for everything. And
So I don't want to say something too controversial, but you made a point. When will people say it's of a threat because everything is rising? And in my particular point, I think we're already there because anti-Semitism is normalized. It's no longer hidden under a rock. And just as we saw in Sandro with the school, where people could say what they said about the professor out loud, same things are being said out loud today.
true.
And I will make, I know I've talked a lot this time, so forgive
No,
me. This story
I'm
really,
loving everything you've said. I'm loving everybody's participation. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
this story moved me a lot because about a month ago, with so much anti-Semitism in the area, I made a decision that was very hard for me, which is I live in a condo and I live with a lot of people have died or moved and everybody has changed. And as we know, Florida has a proliferation of guns and anti-Semitism. There's incidents, at least in my ADL reports, weekly. And I made the very, very hard decision that it wasn't cowardly, it was smart. And I removed my mezuzah because I don't want somebody walking down the hall in my condo who might be crazy with a gun saying, I just want to pop into that apartment with a gun. And it was I had to think if it was cowardly or smart. And I decided staying alive is not cowardly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry.
it-
I'm sorry that
I think it's
you felt
just,
like that.
you know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
another time, that's a whole nother discussion. You
Right,
know,
right.
I mean, I'm sure many of us live in community settings.
Uh-huh.
That's very sad.
Yeah.
It makes me personally, and probably I'm quite naive in many ways. I don't think I am, but it makes me want to take my Magen David, my Star of David that I wear around my neck, and put it outside on my shirt when I'm in public, because I feel somewhat defiant. How do you dare, and how dare you even look at me as if there's something wrong with me?
Yeah.
I've always felt that way for other kinds of reasons. And so I understand exactly what, I don't know your name, the other lady, but I can understand how she feels, and it must have been a heart-wrenching decision. It makes me want to put up 2 mezuzahs. I don't know. It's
But
just
the idea being that
different reaction.
in both ways we are feeling the anti-Semitism that is.
Absolutely.
Eva, did you have something to say?
Yes,
Hi,
I
Eva.
wanted to say that when I was in Rome as a tourist and I had a Jewish tour guide who was fabulous, he told us that until the 20th century, Roman Jews put their mezuzahs on the inside of the door because of anti-Semitism.
Wow.
Interesting.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, interesting. Right.
That's
So,
what I did. I moved mine inside.
yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. The idea being, how many of you have seen the advertising on TV about anti-Semitism? Did you see that? It's a lot of powerful ads that are up now. Yeah. So obviously, it has come to the forefront, and people are trying to deal with it. The question is, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with it? So for me,
that there's an easy answer to that, but it's very political. So
Yeah.
right.
But
And everybody has a different opinion of how to go do that. So we don't want to go there. Of course.
no, but how about dealing with the root cause of this anti-Semitism, especially here in Florida?
Right.
With the governor that you have. I mean, it's ridiculous.
It's very hard. Okay.
So if they're, I'll just go on a limb and be as careful as I can.
Oh,
Okay.
White supremacists who are neo-Nazis, by definition, have been defined as a terrorist group. So where the hell is the FBI and the DOJ on shutting down a domestic terrorist group that is primarily based in South Florida?
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's a very good point, and that's, yeah, well made, right, exactly. Okay. You know, I think for me, one of the takeaway messages of this book is a famous quote that I had to actually look it up to get the exact quote. But I think it really speaks to what this book is about. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men
Do
to
nothing.
do nothing. You're saying it with me, but I think it's really true that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. And
where we are today.
that's really what happens is when good men do nothing and they let the evil forces kind of overcome the situation. And that's what this.
Well, welcome to the world now.
Well, I
Even in
Back
this,
to the book, I'm going to make a comment that it reminded me of years ago reading Primo Levi.
yeah,
And so one of the things that I did after I finished the book is I didn't reread his book, but I read a lot about his biography and his history and what he went through pre-war and post-war. And it was moving, but it brings up a point that you made at the beginning, which is we know so much about people in Eastern Europe and not very much about people in Italy.
right, exactly. So
We shouldn't have crosstalk.
yeah, no, I think okay.
Put yourself on mute.
Yeah, put yourselves on mute if you've got some background noise. But anyways, I think this has been a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And I am so happy to have seen all of you, to have had all of you on board here today. And I really look forward to hopefully continuing one way or another with you guys. Please be on the lookout for what's coming up. We've got a whole lot of good books that we can certainly be doing together. So be on the
So
lookout.
will we hear from you in January about February?
So what we will, yes, I would think so. We'll talk about, yeah, I'm going to talk with Leah and with Allie, and we're going to come up with whatever our plan is going to be. But it's interesting that so many of you are interested only in Zoom, right?
Yes.
Okay. So really of this group, there were only a couple of you that were willing to even do live, right?
I would do live if you had it.
We will do live.
He does have
it.
Okay.
But if you don't have the live, I still think it's an excellent forum, and you know I will
Right.
try my
Okay.
best to be on the Zoom.
Okay. All right. Well, you know what? We'll meet together with the committee and see how we're going to proceed. But again, I just really have enjoyed being with you all, and we look forward to seeing you all again. And thank you to Leah for organizing this today. And be on the lookout for what's to come. I wish all of you a very happy Hanukkah. Wonderful.
May
20.
I ask the question? Do I assume there's nothing in January at all?
Right there, we have nothing going on in January. Yeah, nothing in January. Part of that is not anything. I'm actually going to be traveling, so
Good
that's
for you.
Yeah, so that's why we're getting January.
So we'll get to hear about the book and the date in a timely fashion.
Yes, Leah,
Okay.
we'll be meeting. Yes, exactly. Okay.
That's great.
Thank you.
All
Thank you
right,
so
guys.
much.
Great
Thank
to see
you.
you all.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Safe
Bye-bye.
travel.
Thanks for joining
Excellent.
us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks
Be
for your
well.
comments. Wonderful
Gina.
comments today. Thank you.
Well done.
Bye,
Well
Joyce.
done.
What?
Bye, Joyce.
Bye, guys.
Bye. I'll speak to you soon.
Okay,
What do I
bye.
do?